So the next up is Natalie Burnell of Coin Stories podcast. She's going to do a fireside chat with Mr. Ramaswamy.
We had the chance to cover a lot of ground already this week on my show, but I have a question because one thing that we talked about is how there's been sort of a decline of the American dream. And financial sovereignty is so core to be able to have economic hope and take care of yourself and your family for generations. So how do you think something like Bitcoin can help rebuild the American dream as a form of digital hard money?
Yeah, so look, what is the American dream? We use this term loosely. What does it actually mean? I think it means that no matter who you are, where your parents come from, or what your skin color is, that you're free to achieve whatever you want in this country with your own hard work, your own ingenuity, your own commitment, your own dedication, period, without anybody standing in your way. Well, I think one of the things that's stood in the way of the growth of our economy, real wage growth for the bottom 99% over the course of the last 25 years, is actually the U.S. Federal Reserve. So you want to walk through the specifics of monetary policy. What they say is that any wage growth is a marker, a leading indicator of inflation. Now, first of all, that's false. Anybody who understands the business cycle knows that wages are often the last thing to go up in that business cycle. So that means the Fed has consistently been tightening monetary policy right into a downturn of the business cycle. That's actually created the very financial crises, the boom-bust, then bailout cycles that we've experienced. And Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies more broadly was born in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis and those bailouts. Well, if it turns out that the U.S. Fed isn't trying to play God anymore, we would have actually had real wage growth, that they're not playing whack-a-mole every time wages go up. So what does Bitcoin represent? I would talk about decentralized alternatives more broadly, but Bitcoin in particular is an alternative to that game that the Federal Reserve is able to play from on high, like God printing money from heaven, like manna from heaven. It's a fixed supply. There's no new issuance. And it's something that everybody's able to hold in a decentralized and anonymous manner. So when you have an alternative to that system, that calls the Fed's bluff. And actually, for me, puts me in a better position to say that the U.S. Fed should have one purpose: restore the stability and value of the dollar, peg it to a basket of commodities, period. And I don't need 23,000 employees at the U.S. Federal Reserve to do it. We could do it with a 90% headcount reduction. We'd have more than enough people still left to carry out that function. And so, yes, how has that been a threat to the American dream when you have a U.S. Fed that's fundamentally hostile to wage growth? It's no surprise that real wage growth has been flat for the bottom 99% in this country. When you have alternatives to that Federal Reserve that's able to proceed with those abuses, that's how you're actually going to, from our generation, if I may say this, liberate an American dream that many people have felt in their bones wasn't available to them. Well, this is one of the reasons why. And I think unlocking that will allow us to restore that idea that, yes, with your own hard work and ingenuity, you can get as far as you want to without anybody standing in your way. That's the American dream.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that potentially Bitcoin might be one of those commodities that you eventually tie the dollar to. Digging into this regulatory framework that you're proposing, I know that you've mentioned digital assets are not inherently securities. So can you elaborate a little bit about that and what criteria would be used to distinguish securities from commodities?
So first of all, I would say that the lack of an answer is the worst answer of all. I mean, the fact that you have Gary Gensler before Congress unable to even state whether Ethereum is or is not a security is the best evidence you have for a system that has badly failed. The chief top dog of the top regulator that's responsible for securities in the United States can't comment on whether one of the most popularly used and widely traded cryptocurrencies is actually a security or not. That's evidence of intentionality, actually, because ambiguity is the friend of the tyrant. Think about what's actually vague here. That allows them to decide after the fact whether or not they want to go after you with what you will call the regulation by enforcement paradigm. So the first answer is, it almost doesn't matter what the specifics are, at least give us an answer. So that happens on my watch, is we're going to have a simple safe harbor for a short amount of time before the SEC or the CFTC has decided in whose domain it falls so that people don't have to operate in the shadow of ambiguity. Now I'll give you the definition that I'll see through. model it on what a security actually was. If there is an issuer that can choose to issue securities that actually provide voting rights and other elements that resemble shares, and there's a discretion of an individual or an actor to issue more of it, and that has the same characteristics as a stock or another form of security, which most cryptocurrencies do not, then it would be regulated as a commodity instead of a security. But if somebody claims something's a cryptocurrency, but it's really just a company that has an operating business that can issue unlimited amounts of stock to bring in capital to a corporate chest, then yes, you're going to use the same regime that you use for regulating those stocks and securities today. But it's not a separate backdoor way of choking a set of commodities out of existence, which is what they're trying to do by backdoor regulating them into cryptocurrencies, but he didn't have the guts to actually say that to Congress, by instead leaving it ambiguous, and that's what leaves us this regulation by enforcement paradigm that has to end on my watch.
Well, we do have this wild west, more than 20,000 cryptocurrencies, new ones sprouting up. There might be soon a Vivek coin, right? You've highlighted the First Amendment's protection of code as speech. So how will you balance this freedom with preventing and prosecuting the bad actors that you mentioned? You wrote in your book, Capitalist Punishment, about FTX and some of the nefarious activities that have been happening in the space. So how will you prevent these pump and dump scammers?
Well, the reality is this is old school fraud, actually. So it's not something that's specific to cryptocurrencies at all. You could look at other exchanges that have made similar mistakes to what FTX has done and weren't held accountable for it just because they happen to have been operating in exchanges for assets that were not digital assets in the first place. And so people have this conceptual error just because they were principally digital assets or cryptocurrencies traded on that exchange, that was a crypto-specific phenomenon. It's not. It's old school fraud, telling people you're not going to do one thing with their assets or their money and in fact doing another. Telling people that you're not going to use that as collateral to make your own bets when in fact you're able to do that with an unrelated firm that you actually own part of. That's old school fraud. So theft, fraud, telling people you're going to do one thing when in fact doing another, that's wrong whether it's a hard asset or a digital asset. And I think the conceptual error that a lot of politicians are making is to say that just because this happens to be a digital asset, somehow there's a different set of heightened rules that need to apply. No, I think it's the same rules that have always been used. I don't care who you are, if it's my USB stick or my car, if you steal it and it belongs to me, you could apply the same set of rules and the same set of laws to prosecute those who are responsible. That's the answer. And the irony is we're in the worst of all worlds where people didn't ask the question of why that actually was able to exist in a world with the SEC. How was SBF and FTX able to get as far as they did? It's you're living in the worst of all worlds when you tell yourself that you're applying heightened regulations to this new standard of cryptocurrency when in fact you're failing to enforce and detect the failures and the breakages of the rule of law in the first place. So that ends on my watch. We're going to treat digital assets like any other asset in a way that the same old set of rules apply rather than creating new ones on the hip from the fly.
I'm going to end on a more broad question. What has uniquely prepared you for the role of president?
Look, so my entire career has been about taking on bureaucracies. I mean, I wasn't born into wealth. My parents came to this country with no money 40 years ago. I've gone on to found multiple multi-billion-dollar companies. I built a biotech company that was in a regulated industry, by the way. Very similar issues that we're talking about here apply between the FDA and the drug discovery industry. I oversaw the development of 5 medicines that are FDA approved, standing up to the bureaucracy of Big Pharma because we actually ended up developing medicines that Big Pharma had abandoned. My second business was a business called Strive that stood up to the ESG cartel, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, abusing the money of everyday retirees and investors to vote for environmental and social agendas in corporate America's boardrooms that most Americans did not approve of. That's a different kind of financial abuse. I built an asset manager that was the leading anti-ESG asset manager, crossed $1 billion in assets under management in a year after launching our first fund. And so for me, I'm not a politician, but I have built my career and have achieved success, if I may say it, by taking on bureaucracies. Bureaucracy of Big Pharma, the bureaucracy of the ESG cartel. Now I'm looking to take on the biggest bureaucracy of all, and that is the bureaucracy of the shadow government in Washington, D.C. It's not even Congress. It's the millions upon millions of federal bureaucrats who were never elected to their position in the first place, and they're the ones trying to choke the U.S. energy sector from oil and gas to drug discovery to the advent and innovation of cryptocurrencies out of existence. And so, look, I have a reasonable shot. I'll be very, very frank with you all. We have a uphill path, but a clear path nonetheless for me to be your next president. There'll be 3 Republican candidates on that debate stage next week. I'm one of them. I think I'm the most pro-crypto candidate that has ever run for president of the United States. And so at this stage of the race, when I see our clear path, we're not shy about asking everybody else to do their part. Our family, we've been successful. This country has blessed us with much. We're stopping at nothing in terms of the investment and the financial and non-financial investment we're making to allow this to succeed. I'm asking for everybody else here. I mean, we're going to do our part. We're hosting a reception, I know, right after this. There's a QR code that I think they're going to put up on the screen. We take crypto for people who are able to support us to whatever maximal level you're able to. If you all do your part, Apoorv and I and our family, we're going to do ours. I think too often you have a lot of independent candidates or libertarians or otherwise that are in political races to make a point. The point never really gets made without winning. And the reason I'm running as a Republican is that we do live in a two-party system, but we have to use that system to achieve a pro-American agenda. And so at this stage of the race, we're not going to be shy about asking everybody for help. I think we have a clear path to success. And whether or not we succeed depends on whether like-minded Americans across this country lift us up. And so I'm going to ask everybody here to do whatever the maximum is you're able. From everybody who's a similar pioneer and an innovator in the same way, if you all do your part, we're going to do ours. And between now and the Iowa caucus on January 15th, I think we have an opportunity to turn this country upside down. We'll put up that QR code. Join us at the reception. It's a minimum. We'll ask for is $1,000 for people to come in whatever format they're able to, crypto or other, any multiple currencies accepted, U.S. dollar included. But we're going to ask for everybody's help. And if we, the people, stand up for the same principles that our founding fathers did in 1776, then I'm confident that our country's best days can still be ahead of us. And that's why we wanted to come here to unveil this. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I believe you're the only candidate that has a crypto policy framework. So I know a lot of people are going to be wondering if other candidates come out with one as well. Are you going to bring up Bitcoin in a debate?
I think we should. I mean, the debate moderators, I tried to scold them into actually asking some questions of common sense last time. But if they don't bring it up, maybe it's going to be up to the candidates to bring it up. I actually...
Someone's got to bring it up.
The first Republican candidate, I'm told, to actually, in our financial disclosures, it turns out I've owned, crypto in my personal holdings. You have to disclose that. But actually, when that came out, I think I was the first presidential candidate in history for whom that was true. But it's a statement of who we are as Americans. And so, I think it's a responsibility for me as a member of a different generation to bring that up. So if they don't bring it up in the next couple of debates, you can be rest assured that I will.
All right.
And make sure we have that debate. So
we'll
thank you very much
for that. Thank you so much. We're out of time, but Vivek Ramaswamy, candidate for president.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate your help. Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for coming out to the 2023 North American Blockchain Summit. It was the best summit yet. We look forward to hosting you again next year. If you enjoyed the summit or like what you saw in this video, be sure to subscribe. If you're interested in learning more about membership in the TBC, go to texasblockchaincouncil.org to learn more.